God, we're so full of shit. For all our species dick-swinging bravado, for all our back-patting and boasting about our superior human faculty of consciousness, it's amazing just how very unaware we are of the world spinning right in front of our eyes. I think, therefore I am. Those words are at the very foundation of Western understanding. 5 words. 5. And 2 of them are I. What of the rest of the world and everybody else in it? We may exist, but it's in a tiny universe comprised of a population of 1. We may have produced more pages of philosophy and religion about our wonderful self-awareness than there are visible stars in the sky, but most of us wouldn't be able to tell you what our neighbor does for a living. Hell, we don't even know when we're living in the midst of a historical epoch of terror. I didn't. In 1990, I was 16 and bursting with good old-fashioned American semen. My days were mostly spent following around my penis to whatever pretty girl it led me to, but I wasn't aware, capital A aware, that I was living in the midst of a state of serious sexual terror. Oh, I knew about HIV/AIDS. I knew in a health class phys ed kind of way that there was this thing out there somewhere that could kill me if I wasn't careful where I pointed my semen squirt gun. But I didn't know about it. I had never come to terms with it. Not really. Never looked it in the eye. The point is this, and I know it's a fine one, but it's true all the same. You can know about something without being aware of it. In fact, you could know something is right there in front of you and be completely oblivious to it. We know about the air, but how many times a year do you think we think about it? How often are we aware of it? Almost never. And air is basically what keeps us alive. Let's say this hypothetically, for instance. Every time you turn on the faucet to get a drink of water, you know that at least part of what's coming out is urine. Your neighbor's urine, let's say. There's some weird cosmic plumbing issue in this hypothetical instance that our greatest plumbers could never resolve, and it's like this pretty much for everyone. Everyone's water on the block, in the town, in the country, is laced with a little bit of piss. If it's always been that way, even though you know about it, at some point you're going to become unaware of it, if indeed you were ever really aware of it to begin with. And then along comes some dude from some distant land banging on your front door screaming, "Hey buddy, you got any idea that you're drinking common piss out of that faucet of yours?" Well, you'd be stunned and embarrassed, and you'd be suddenly faced with the question of how to deal with this asshole who just fucked everything up for you. For all intents and purposes, that's pretty much what the 1993 film and the band played on is. It's someone on America's front lawn shouting, "Hey, look at how fucked up this thing is that's been happening in our country." It's almost literally this, in fact, for it was originally a made-for-cable picture, and it entered our suburban living rooms almost against our will. Directed by Roger Spottiswoode and based on the eye-opening book by then San Francisco Chronicle journalist Randy Shilts, the film chronicles the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, covering its initial infiltration of the gay community and its rapid spreading, the first days of its detection, the dark alley attempts by the scientific community to understand it, their quibbling over credit for the progress being made, the enraging bureaucratic stupidity of the government institutions tasked to deal with it, and, of course, the terror-inducing escalation of the disease's steadily climbing death toll. The film stars Matthew Modine and Alan Alda and features cameos by just about every other actor working in Hollywood at the time, straight on down to cameo appearances by Steve Martin and Phil Collins, of all people. By all accounts, most of them worked on scale in the spirit of solidarity and civil duty. It's a film not without its flaws. Firstly, it falls into that amorphous category of edutainment, and finding the line between the educational and the entertaining is never an easy task. At the risk of overgeneralizing here, I'd say that the best films of the genre are the ones that take the most liberties with the material, but that very fact, of course, undermines their respective educational value. And the band plays on, strictly as a work of cinema, is clunky and probably too long. Most of the character arc subplots seem to me underdeveloped for their being crammed into a sea of historical and medical pamphlet bullet points. Then there's that weird prologue where the Modine character witnesses the effects of the Ebola virus in Africa, but whose scene is apropos of really nothing that has to do with the actual subject matter at hand. I could complain, too, about things like the mawkish music and the heavy-handed explanations of gay lifestyle being telegraphed to the suburban audience. On the other hand, I could argue that the sheer emotional power of the epilogue erases any of the film's cinematic shortcomings. But the film as a work of cinema notwithstanding, as a Trojan horse of information breaching the gates of couch potato America, it's incredibly successful. Remarkable, actually. To be sure, a lot of us watching it on HBO when the film was initially released learned most of what we knew about the disease from this film. We became aware of AIDS at last. Upon viewing it this time around, 22 years later, when being diagnosed with HIV isn't the automatic death sentence it once was, I was most struck by the film's indictment of the governmental institutions who so obstinately tried to remain unaware of the threats posed by the disease long after they should have conceded its deadliness. The finger points at many, including the Food and Drug Administration and, by extension, Ronald Reagan and his conservative administration. These governmental officials, because of fiscal considerations or homophobia, take your pick, willfully ignored the HIV/AIDS threat so adamantly that they were implicitly willing to continue to distribute HIV-infected blood supplies to patients who were in need of it. In other words, they were willing to be murderers. This is straight from Shilts' book. The discovery of AIDS in the nation's blood supply and subsequent lack of response by the blood banking leadership occurred as early as 1982. Yet not until 1985, when AIDS antibody testing was approved by the Food and Drug Administration, did blood bank industry leaders acknowledge that HIV could be transmitted through blood transfusions. If this isn't cause to stand on a lawn, like Shilts and these filmmakers did with this film, and shout at the people living inside with warnings that they were drinking piss, I don't know what is. The CDC first began yelling on the lawn of the White House in 1982. Ronald Reagan didn't even mention the word AIDS until 1987. Governmental bureaucracies run by big businesses will almost without fail attempt to maintain the status quo in lieu of protecting the community they're tasked to serve. Let me say that again in case anyone missed it. Just about every fucking time, those who run the government would rather murder the people they vowed to serve than disrupt their business interests. And this is the lesson of the film as far as I'm concerned. Ordinary people, people like you and me, need to be capital A aware whenever possible, because our government, and certainly the corporations who run our government, would rather not be. It's because of the guts of filmmakers like those responsible for this film and the heroes depicted in the book upon which it's based that HIV/AIDS has become something that doesn't automatically kill those who become infected. And now I know this is just a goofy movie show where a few nerds sit around and blather our opinions about movies. So I won't take a minute here to mention some of the current issues that we know about, but of which some of us choose to remain more or less unaware. I won't take a minute to mention issues like human-caused global warming and or the energy consumption wars our oil business-run government waged and continue to wage to this day. I won't mention how glaringly obvious it is that big business-run governments like ours would rather remain willfully unaware in order to not disrupt their business interests, even though people are dying. Another way to say this, of course, is that our big business-run government is killing people by their willful unawareness, and those running it should be investigated and tried for their crimes against humanity. No one's saying it's easy to be capital A aware of life. It's probably impossible to be capital A aware all the time, in fact. Total awareness is the business of saints and mystics and Christ and Buddha. So I cast no aspersions on ordinary folks. And I'm certainly not excluded from willful unawareness. See, when by the time this film came out, by the time AIDS was getting close to my personal experience, I had had unprotected sex many times. But I didn't go and get tested because I was a coward. Because it was easier to think that if I had contracted the disease, I didn't want to know about it. I, along with many others of my generation, was willfully unaware. We knew we were living with terror, but we didn't know. And to be honest, I still haven't had an AIDS test to this day. And the only way I know I'm clean is that no one said anything to the contrary when I had my blood test done when I was married. So I realize now that I've been living with a kind of willful ignorance for half of my life. Out of what? Stupidity? Cowardice? Yes. But in the end, being unaware just equals plain old selfishness. Ignorance is hell. Ignorance is a hell of free-floating anxiety and uncertain terror and a gurgling guilt that eats at your soul like an acid. I may have enjoyed a superficial bliss in my ignorance, but I have no way to assess what it took out of my soul, what price my psyche paid for my own constructed uncertainty, my cowardice, my selfishness. That I didn't die or contribute to the death toll of the HIV/AIDS epidemic was only by way of sheer dumb luck, the same sort of dumb luck that every dumb animal possesses. So much for the superior human faculty of awareness.
Hey, Joe, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really close to you right now, Joe. I just want you to know that. So I'm with you, and I know that was a very emotional thing to do, and I'm very emotional right now as well. I'm with you 100%. I just want you to know that.
Yeah. Well, going into this, Tom, I didn't realize how emotional I would get about it. It's really weird, man, because when I sat down, I really didn't know what I was going to write or what I was going to say. And then I realized how this stuff, we've been living with it, our generation. You know?
I think I didn't put much thought into assigning the topic to everybody. And then after watching these films and going back and thinking about my life and thinking about this epidemic that was, I mean, it's so funny how quiet it is right now.
Yeah.
It's amazing how quiet it is, but yet people are still suffering and people are definitely still dying.
People are living with it though now, so it's not the same as what it was.
Right. I mean, it's so funny because Magic Johnson has been in the headlines over the past couple days.
Right.
And it's just amazing to think that he is just 20 years into being infected with HIV, and it seems like he's just going to live a plentiful life.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people are living with it now. A lot of people are, so if you can get early detection,
right,
you don't have to die. You don't have to die. Not like what was happening.
Not within 6 months.
No. Yeah.
But don't make no mistake about it, Joe. The reality is the poor people will die a lot sooner than those with the money.
That's true.
I don't know if either one of you two have had anyone close to you die of the disease or any friend or family member. I will say this, that I have a current family member that has the virus, and I had a great uncle who died from the virus in the 80s. So the disease itself has been in my family.
Wow.
So there's an effect there.
So you've seen it firsthand.
As much as I was allowed to see it, I was young when my great uncle died from it, and even it's so funny because I think it was probably the mid 80s when he died from it, and I was still maybe 11 years old, 12 years old, but and I wasn't really that part. I wasn't involved that much with my dad's side of the family then, because he wasn't in my life.
Right.
But he was in my life when I was young, so I remember him, and he was extremely homosexual. I mean, dude, I remember being 4 or 5 years old, staying at my grandparents' house, and when I was getting ready for bed, he was getting ready to go out, and he'd come downstairs, Max, dressed in women's clothing to go out for the evening. Oddly enough. Well, the reason why you just heard those scissors cutting is because Joe experienced a blackout during a storm we had, and we're now picking up this episode. Joe, what is it, like 6 days later?
Yeah, which is such a bummer because we were just grooving so hard on that.
I was near tears, Joe.
Yeah, I got there. I got pretty close there too, Tom.
And now I'm happy and upbeat, and we're talking about AIDS.
I know, it's so weird. Well, we were gonna try to pick it up like seamlessly and try to pretend like nothing happened, but we were just talking about how crazy it was that as soon you started talking about your uncle coming down the stairs, and then it was like all of a sudden he came down and zapped us off of our call.
Well, all right, well, let's get back into that because that is kind of interesting, and it's all it's all on the table, it's all relevant. About my uncle, and I will let me just say this: I did have an uncle who died from AIDS in the 80s, and he was a homosexual. But what I was getting at was the cross-dressing thing too, which we were also talking about on our previous episode on the Dallas Buyers Club review. But my uncle, when I was a kid, I mean, I couldn't have been, guys, more than 4 or 5 years old, and my uncle would go upstairs. I mean, to me, you know, he just seemed like a normal guy. He'd go upstairs after dinner, and about 2 hours later, when the sun started to go down, before he went out to meet his friends, he'd come down the stairs dressed in full women's clothing. Now, when you're 4 or 5 years old, this is kind of bizarre, don't you think? I mean, well, you could be 25 years old, and it's still bizarre. But
especially back then, it was much more taboo back then in the 80s.
You're talking about, you know, probably 78, 79, 1980, you know, around that time. And he was a nice guy. I mean, you know, he was, you know, very nice to me. My grandmother was his sister. They were, I think, half siblings. So, but he was living at my grandparents' house at that time, and it was just very, you know, it was very weird to see. And then ultimately, you find out like 7 years later that he dies of this terrible disease. But again, all this stuff is what we're talking about here. I had an uncle who loved to dress up in women's clothing. He was a homosexual. He died of AIDS, and most importantly, and this is the thing that is probably the most bizarre, is that my grandmother, his sister, to the day she died, denied that he was a homosexual.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, never underestimate the power of denial, Joe.
Yeah, there was a lot of that denial stuff. It actually was in my family too. My cousin had come out. She was lesbian, and it was the mid '80s, and she had to leave home at 16 because of her. You know, my aunt couldn't do it.
They kicked her out.
It was a very, very traumatic and
16 years old.
Yeah, it was a very turbulent period of time for us too, because she came to live with me, which was really, really crazy. But it wouldn't happen like that today, I don't think. I think kids have a much easier time.
Well, obviously, you know, people our age now have the kids, Joe, and I think that we have become more tolerant. We were the Generation Xers are the beginning of more tolerance.
Probably, and I think a lot of what happened with this film, a lot of what this film deals with, and the culture of gays becoming, you know, especially just what I had said in the review is how, this made us aware of gay culture in a lot of ways,
right.
And so because of this epidemic, they became very, visible. Which is really a great thing. And, you know, I guess it started back in the 60s, but really it wasn't until the 80s, right. I think, that they really started to become less of a taboo, and they became more acceptable, right. Leading right up to the day, you know, we're still waging those wars of the gay marriage
right.
stuff.
And what's interesting about In the Band Played On is how it focuses. I mean, the first hour of the film, when the epidemic first begins, I mean, it's basically labeled a gay disease.
Yeah, gay-related.
GRID, I think, was the initial name. GRID, right. Yeah, exactly. Right. GRID was the name of the disease, and it was totally on them. And most people thought it was, you know, I mean, the religious right rather would insist that it was God coming down on gay people, you know, and killing them, and so on.
Yeah,
and so
and
forth.
you know, even the attitude and the posture that this film is taking, like, I felt like it was really heavy-handed. I said that in my review as well, that it was like really heavy-handed, like going out of way to be like telegraph to the audience, like, well, not all gay people are so flamboyant, like that kind of stuff, right. Like really educational type of stuff, you know.
Right,
I mean?
right. Yeah, they're mostly hanging out in bathhouses. They're really not that flamboyant. They're just.
But they really make it a point to be like, well, most of the people that I know don't hang out. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. You know.
Right. Totally. Max, how you doing over there, brother?
I'm doing good, brother. I'm just sitting back. It's morning out here in Cali. You know, usually I'm drinking during the show. Kind of sucks that I'm not, but I'm just sitting back and talking about AIDS.
Do you have some eggs, home fries, and orange juice going?
Nah, man, you know, I've already eaten breakfast, so it's all good. I'm just kind of cruising, you know, just sort of listening.
What's going on with the Southern Cali Max version of Max this morning?
Jeez Louise.
Maybe I should have a mimosa.
This is like this is the morning radio version. Right? Hey, welcome to morning.
All right, guys, we're talking about And the Band Played On, or as I like to call it, it's a mad, 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 mad world. Because I got to tell you, cameos kill this movie. Who cares about AIDS? Let's bring in as many stars as humanly possible. It gets so distracting that you want to shoot out the TV with a shotgun.
You find that distracting that they're bringing in like Steve Martin for like a 2-3 minute scene, Max, and Phil Collins and so on, Richard Gere, so on and so forth?
It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
And by the way, Steve Martin, Joe, he was like the biggest star in the world at that point.
Yeah,
or one of them anyway.
And Lily
Yeah,
Tomlin,
you know what I was thinking? Wow, one of the biggest stars in the world is doing this scene in this HBO movie, and by the time I was done thinking of that, the scene was over.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean that was a lot of what's going on here. It's like basically like everyone's like, "Come on, let's go and do a public service announcement,"
Right.
and it kind of came through with the film. You know, watching it, that it did date it a little bit. You know, like
Right.
it's not a movie. Like I was saying in the review there, it's sort of like this weird cross between educational film and you know, and cinema. You know, it doesn't. It's a weird divide there. You know.
Right, right. I mean, and there's not much any of these people have to work with. I mean, Gere has a little bit to work with, like a very little bit, like where you could see him trying to put in a performance.
Well, it's so hard to develop something like, you know, Max saying, like you have a couple of minutes on screen.
I know.
You know, you're supposed to develop a whole personal.
You know, it's
like,
so funny. Yeah, you're right about that. There have been very few actors in the history of cinema that have been able to take like 5 to 15 minutes of screen time and turn it into like an amazing, unforgettable, memorable performance. Two come to my mind. Michael Shannon in Revolutionary Road, who has like 8 minutes of screen time, winds up getting a Best Supporting Actor nomination, and Ned Beatty in Network. You know, these are two performances that are just like completely insanely good for such a very short period of time that just like live on in you know, cinematic history as two of the all-time great performances.
I thought Angels in America was a far more effective epic miniseries conquering the virus, featuring a lot of big stars. It just had that through line where the writing and the visuals and the story overpowered everything, and everything kind of blended well together. It's like what I was talking about with Dallas Buyers, but yeah, this just felt like a paint by numbers pedestrian starch.
what's that movie that you were just talking
That's
about?
a miniseries from HBO, right, Max?
Yeah, Angels in America. It was based on I believe it's a Pulitzer-winning play about people dying of AIDS.
Wow, I totally missed that one. It released around the same time.
I think it was a few years later.
I think this might be in around 2000, 2003.
2003.
Yeah, and it has. Yeah, he's right. I mean, you have Al Pacino, Meryl Streep, Emma Thompson is in it. I mean, it just keeps going down the line here. It looks
Plus, it had an emotional punch, which I felt nothing watching And the Band Played On. I felt nothing. I was getting a lot of facts, which was fine, and I was getting them delivered to me by Matthew Modine and Gandalf the Grey, and
That's right.
You know, it's funny, Max, you say that because I have not watched And the Band Played On in years, and I remember it being I thought it was a lot better than it actually is, but I think I thought that it was better is because of what you're saying, is because there was a lot of information crammed into this movie. So at the time when I'm watching this, you know, say in my early 20s, it plays a lot differently because you're learning so much.
yeah.
You know, but now it's, you know, I guess 20 years later, and you have all this information and you're aware of all this stuff surrounding the disease. You're right. It's pretty dated.
Yeah, and it didn't have to be, you know. I mean, but I will say this: I'm busting on the cameos, but Phil Collins showing up as the gay French bathhouse owner with the spirit gum mustache falling off made me very happy.
That was hilarious.
But you know, if we're talking about cinematic depictions of AIDS, look no further than to the 1993 documentary Silver Lake Life: The View from Here. And it's basically about this gay couple, and one of them is dying of AIDS. Like, he's a skeleton. And he says, you know what? Let's get the word out. Let's show what a loving couple we are, but I want you to film my death. And they go the distance on this thing. And I'll never forget it. I was living in Seattle at the time when I first saw it, and I ran a video store right there on Lake Washington. And this is like, it's so funny. My friend, who happens to be gay, we share a love of what we call grief porn, where it's just sort of like watching those things like How to Die in Oregon and a movie like Silver Lake Life and just true life death stuff and just feeling the emotion and power of it. You know what I mean? And like not getting off on it in a way of porn, but just saying how it sort of envelopes you and to the point where you're sort of mired in it. Yeah. Wallowing in despair as you watch other people die and realize how fragile we are.
Right. That sounds like
I think those things could have been interjected into And the Band Played On.
Right.
They were doing so much with this, you know what I mean? Like I think that it being a film like a tearjerker even, it would have been impossible to cover everything that was in the book and everything they were trying to convey and to try to educate. Honestly, think about
what was Spottiswoode trying to do with adapting the book into this movie? Was he just was he concentrating on information? Obviously,
I think it was an effort of making people aware of the disease and what's going on.
And for that, it deserves an A.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think that was its main goal, was to bring to the HBO audience, which is basically all of Middle America, to bring them into awareness of what's going on and what's been going on, Right. And for that it was effective. But yeah, as a film, it's certainly it's not look, Soderbergh does a fucking great job with these sorts of films, like Aaron Brockovich or whatever. Right. And it was funny watching this film.
Or Liberace, the Liberace movie.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, Behind the Candelabra, which, again, he died of AIDS, right?
I don't know. Did he?
I think he did. They denied it at the time, but over a period of time, you can't deny it. But so again, that is, it's all in the same ballpark, what we're talking about.
That's a roller coaster ride, Joe. And that's
it's on my queue,
too. Yeah, but it's
Behind the Candelabra, Max.
Yeah, but it is. Oh my God, it's such a guilty pleasure. It's just like
you're right about that for so many reasons. Joe, Behind the Candelabra, I watched it for the on HBO. I sat down, I watched it, I gave it my full attention, and I enjoyed it. And now if it's like one of those movies that when you're channel surfing and Behind the Candelabra's on, it's like you're in. You'll go in anytime during any time in a movie. You just sit there. I mean, that's how much I enjoy it. I think it's one of Soderbergh's finest achievements.
I got to check it out. It's on my queue. It's coming up next pretty soon here, so I'm looking forward to it. But when I was talking about, when I was thinking about when I was watching this film, it's like, talking about how this is partially education and partially film. This has a really striking resemblance to the film Contagion that he made. If you remember that film, and it's of course that's a completely fictionalized version of it. You know what I mean? Right. So it's weird because that's completely fiction, but it's almost the same sort of film.
Well, you're saying in the sense that you're in and out of different.
Well, it's giving you the mechanisms of how the medical and science community works when coming into contact with the disease, but it was really focused on entertainment and becoming a horror film in a lot of ways.
It's the World War Z of gay AIDS movies.
Right. So I mean, it's just it just was. I was trying to wrap my head around what was going on with this picture, and it's caught in this crossroads between documentary and a film like Contagion. Where that film Contagion works really well. Dealing with the scientific community, coming to terms with the disease, and this one works well as sort of a documentary. But it doesn't quite achieve either one.
Right. What's so funny, thinking about the two, you saying that and thinking about the two movies and thinking about the CDC and the science community. It's take a look at like the CDC and the band played on. They're basically like 10 people crammed into like this really small office, and now it's like big business.
Oh, right.
You know, it's
yeah.
like huge buildings and spacious.
Yeah, well, they both deal with the same thing, even, man. I think one of the lines in this movie was, if doctors are behaving like businessmen, where will people go for doctors, right? I mean,
well,
and
that's the world we're living in, Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the truth.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
My wife works in a medical office, and they're basically it's like an urgent care,
Yeah.
and I think half of their business they're basically drug pushers. They're essentially like
It's amazing.
it's crazy.
I mean, I see
It's
it
crazy.
because again, I'm doing something I probably shouldn't do here, and I'm gonna kick myself in the ass. But like I have my father staying with me, and he's heavily medicated. I mean, he's probably taken like 6 to 10 medications. Just had an operation recently. He's a two or three time stroke victim, and he gets an operation. And what does the doctor give him? Oxycodone to take like 20 pills over a 2-week period, which is fucking stupid. But why are they just giving these people shit that they don't need? To numb them. It just
So many people are addicts. Listen, when we were kids, Tom, nobody was really doing heroin. I mean, if people were doing heroin, they were like few and far between, and they were
and
on
you
the
knew
fringes.
who they were.
Yeah,
right?
They were on the fringes. Now all these kids are getting these painkillers,
Right.
and then the painkillers stop working, and then they're friggin' starting to friggin' smoke heroin, and it's become a fucking epidemic.
Well, there's a huge heroin, and there's a drug. There's an epidemic out here in the town that I live in. I don't know if you've heard of it, Joe. I mean, you have a son, so you might want to be aware. I mean, there's a drug called Molly, which is like a low grade mix of heroin, ecstasy, meth, and cocaine. And downer, and it's
that sounds
like
great.
What?
Sounds great.
No, but it's like all low grade, dude, and it's like you're not getting it's like every time you buy it, it's like it's different, like there's no consistency in what people are getting, and it's very dangerous, and it's like there's been a lot of problems with that with the kids around here. And I've seen a kid on that. I went to my cousin's house one time, and there was this kid on the shit. He was just sitting in a chair tweaking, and I go, "What the fuck is wrong with this kid?" And they're like, he's on a Molly." And he's just sitting there like having like a seizure.
There you go. Our healthcare industry, the fine product of American healthcare.
Right. But it's just amazing what kids are turning to these days. It's not just they're not even starting with pot. They're going right into, because they're already medicated, most likely, right, Joe? I mean, most of these fucking kids are on medication already.
Well, that's how they get started. They start on the, they're pushing.
When they're 5 years old,
kids.
they're on Ritalin, right? I mean,
it's just fucking insane.
It is completely insane. Yeah. Completely. How do you raise 2 normal kids in this world, Joe?
Well, I've been very fortunate. I'm not going to compare it. But
no.
Hey, Max, we were talking last week about if we knew people with AIDS or not. Do you know anyone who died with AIDS? Did you answer that?
I dealt with that, but I just love that I was boldly scolded for not bringing up, I'm not allowed to bring up Tom's dad on the show. And what does he do? He brings up Tom's dad on the show.
Well, it was relevant.
Now, let me ask you this. Was Tom, your dad, was his brother the gay guy who dressed like chicks?
That was his uncle. And
his uncle.
Yeah, and my great uncle.
So there's a lot of troubled fellows in your family.
Absolutely. And I also have a female member of my family right now that is suffering from the virus.
Wow. So do you think they got it from drug needles?
Well, she got it for being, extremely
promiscuous.
Yeah, extremely. Yes, extremely. Wow. Like bad. Like wow.
So it's some fucked up family reunion when everyone gets together. You got a guy tweaking. You got a chick dying of AIDS.
That's why we all just stay away from each other. As much as possible. Well, at least I did.
For 2 years. I really needed money, and for 2 years I was sort of an assistant to a man who used to be very, very prominent in the entertainment business as far as being an entertainment lawyer. And by the time I'd met him, he was well into his 70s, hooked up to oxygen, and in complete denial of who he was. And he was a gay man. He was a gay old man who lived up in the Hollywood Hills. He lived on Woodrow Wilson Drive. His name was Ed. And let's just say that my friend hooked up the job because my friend owns a business. They install media in people's houses. And he said, hey, this guy's looking for someone. I know you were looking for something part-time. So, like, day one, like, without even being interviewed, I'm already being sent on errands. I'm already being sent down to the Gelson's, which is a gourmet grocery store, to pick up all these very specific things. I'm already being sent to buy stamps, and I'm already being told to sit down so we can go through his mail. And this guy was on so many different fucking medications. He was on, you know, he had so many problems. He was so difficult to please, so angry. And the whole time, it took me a year to realize, well, okay, I guess I can tell this guy's pretty gay. He lives alone. You know, he's always talking about Gershwin and always playing show tunes, and he's very imperious, and I don't suffer fools gladly. I'm like, all right. So I became kind of his companion. You know, I drove him to all his doctor's appointments, and, you know, his lesbian sister would come down from Northern California, and she'd check in on him, but it was all just so weird. And, you know, on Christmas, he would throw me $1,000 bonus, and it's like, and then he would complain, oh, all of my money is going away. Have you seen the stock market? And I'm like, no. But I'll never forget, by the time it got really, really bad, and he had to have, the point is, the guy's dying of AIDS, and he's like, I contracted the HIV virus, Max, and I am not a gay man. Okay.
He still wouldn't admit.
He still wouldn't, even to his death.
Yeah.
He's never been with a woman. He has no kids, and all of his friends are gay. I love gay people. I think you're gay. He was one of those guys that thought I was gay. But like
Tom.
Yeah. Oh, great. So, I contracted the disease through a needle. Okay. But one night he said, I need you to come up here. And this is, his health was just getting worse and worse. And this is by the time he needed to hire at-home nurses to take care of him. So he asked me if I could spend the night in the guest room and be on call because he had just had some surgery or some kind of problem. And they had one of those little old people potties that you roll up next to the bed. And it's like, you know, it's got 4 legs. And the bathroom is 2 feet away, and he had to have one of these things. So we bought a baby monitor. And I am on the other side of this house in the hills. And at 4 a.m, I hear, Max, 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 Max. What? Jesus. Hey, Ed, what's going on? You all right? I come into his bedroom, and this guy's bed was full of remotes and cats and papers and books and all kinds of shit. Ed, what's going on? You need to empty the potty. Okay, first off, I'm not a fucking nurse. Second off, that's not part of my job description. I run the errands. I go through the mail with you.
You said that to this man?
No, I'm saying this in my head, but I'm like, holy shit, this isn't what I... But I sucked it up, and I put on some rubber gloves, and I slowly approached the thing. And I didn't know how to get the bucket out of the apparatus. And he goes, you got to treat it like a casserole.
What does that mean?
You know how a casserole, those old casserole dishes, like it's a pot within a pot? So that's how it gets heated. The boiling water heats up the food inside the... So I'm lifting this thing, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So instead of taking it to the toilet like a registered authoritative nurse person would do, I took it outside. I took it outside, and I dumped it in the grass. And this is toxic HIV-infected diarrhea. And it immediately turned the beautiful blue grass bright orange.
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, I can't. So his health got so bad so fast. And I was like, God, I was worried about, you know, and I was still fairly younger and kind of uneducated about AIDS and everything. But he had the scabrous face, and he had, you know,
the lesions.
But I really tried not. But the breaking point was when I was driving him home from and he was getting some kind of dementia or something. I was driving him home from his doctor's appointment in Beverly Hills, and he goes, I want to look at this old house I used to live in. I'm like, no, Ed, we're going home. He grabs the steering wheel and turns my car. He's in the passenger seat. He grabs my steering wheel and turns my car into the oncoming traffic lane to make this crazy turn that makes no sense. And I slapped his arm and I said, don't you ever do that again. By the time I got him up to the house, I said, Ed, our work here is done. I cannot work with you. I hate the way you talk to me. I hate the way you scream at me. You're so irritable. And he burned through like 6 or 7 other assistants after me. The end of the story, guy finally dies. A year later, I hear from the sister from up north. She's down in town. Hey, Max, come by and say hi to me. Go by, go up to the house. It's like a spook house now. It's so haunted. All this stuff's been taken away, you know. Good old Eddie's gone. And I say, wow, that was the roughest 2 years of my life. And she's like, he's been the most miserable, unhappy man for the whole family. But he's taking care of all of us. I mean, he really had. I met Bud Cort through Ed because Bud would come by the house, and I met Bud Cort, and he was a friend of Ed's. And, you know, he could have been something. He could have wrote a memoir. He could have told his story. But no, he was completely closeted, completely angry, and died very sad and alone.
So it's not safe to say that and the Ed played on.
What is the significance of the title, by the way?
Yeah, I don't know. I assumed it was kind of had something to do with the book. Obviously, you know,
sick people are angry, and a lot of people are dying out there, and a lot of people are angry, and I don't know what the hell's going to be done, because it really is all about just get them on the drugs.
That's all it is. I mean, if there's anything that we could learn from watching Dallas Buyers Club and the band played on, that's pretty much the answer to all this. You know what I'm saying, Joe?
What's that? Push the drugs?
Push the drugs. You know?
It's so funny. My mom had a bad accident recently, and completely her arm was severed from her shoulder. So she's going through physical therapy right now, and I talked to her the other day, and I'm like, what's going on? She's like, oh, I'm in so much pain. And I'm like, Mom, why aren't you on the painkillers? Because they gave her the Percocet when she came out of the hospital. And she goes, no, doctor no longer believes in painkillers for me, so I just have to eat the pain. I'm on a leave. And I'm just like, huh. I thought the idea was to get you. So I don't know what this doctor's thinking. What are we doing? Are we putting everyone on drugs to shut them up? Or are we holding drugs back from them and they're suffering in pain?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the doctor. I will say that, you know, as soon as, like, when certain doctors are working on my wife's work, it's like basically free for all for every fucking druggie in fucking New Jersey. They make their rounds and they're friggin' it's crazy. It's the stories that I hear are absolutely fucking insane. Yeah. With these, they say, oh, I'm in pain, I have back pain, and he just gives them fucking.
That's it. That's the truth.
He's shooting it out there. I think that's more the case nowadays than people withholding it. So if doctors are being more responsible, that's something actually to be applauded.
I have a family member that's like addicted to pills, him and his girlfriend. And they have a scam where they go around from hospital to hospital. And they do, like, it's like clockwork. It's like they pick these 4 hospitals over a night's period, and they make the rounds. Like, they dedicate like 12 hours to do this.
Of course, man. Well, you could sell these things. I had no idea how you could sell. How much you could sell.
And you could go into each hospital, and they'll give you like maybe a prescription for like 2 to 10 pain pills.
Yeah, usually more.
You know, and they go around like 4 hospitals, and then they attack that, and then a week later they do it again to 4 other hospitals, and they keep going back and back and making these cycles. I mean, it's amazing. And the hospitals are just giving it away.
I have a funny story. Look, Susie tells me about these stories about these fucking druggies, and they're not all young people having fun with drugs. Some of them are older, and some of them are so zonked, and the fact that doctors are giving them, they have no idea. This one woman, they're sitting, it was a slow day. My wife and the people who work in there are looking out into the parking lot, and they see this woman who they know is a drug seeker. They call them drug seekers, and she's always zonked out of her fucking head. She comes into the parking lot. She tries to pull into the parking lot. She bangs into one car, and then instead of so she reverses to try and go and park in another one. She bangs into the second car. And then instead, so then she realizes this, I guess, and then so she goes and parks in a completely separate spot. She just banged into two cars. Then she walks her ass into the waiting room and sits down like nothing happened. She's reading a magazine. I'm sure the magazine was upside down, you know. And then and then they, you know, they call the cops, and the cops come in, and they're like, she's like, oh, what do you want? They're like, are you know, the marks from these two cars are all over your car you just banged into. So they take her away, you know, and she's like, but I don't feel good. I need to see the doctor. Like, she's just fucking out of it, you know. Wow. So they take her, they book her, whatever, and then 3 hours later, guess where she shows up? Back in the doctor's office, as if nothing happened. Yeah,
it didn't faze her, man.
And they're like, lady, we cannot give you, you cannot see the doctor. The doctor's not going to give you painkillers today. But I don't understand. You don't understand. I'm in a lot of pain. She just has no fucking idea.
That's so sad.
It's sad. It's terrible, man. It's terrible.
Yeah, but I know, like, it's so funny that you're mentioning someone like that. It's like, I know someone exactly like that, Joe. Like, a friend's mother is like, it's a danger that she's even out in public sometimes.
I know, man.
And she's
like
completely zonked out. Moves slow, walks like a zombie, mumbles when she talks, and it's all because of pharmaceutical medication.
Well, they're profitable. I just feel sorry for all the street corner drug dealers who were put out of business by the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, they don't even get to collect unemployment. I don't think those guys.
Yeah. All right, guys. Hey, listen, let's move it along. And I want to get the kids and Larry Clark and whatnot. I do want to remind our listeners that they could. I know I said earlier in the show that you could check out that we were going to interview Leo Fitzpatrick on the show. We're going to release it right next to the show as its own entity, so you can click on our Leo Fitzpatrick interview at thecuttingroompodcast.com. Guys, let's get the kids. Larry Clark, AIDS-related films. Max is going to introduce it.
Real, but that very fact, of course, undermines their respective educational value. And the band plays on strictly as a work of cinema is clunky and probably too long. Most of the character arc subplots seem to me underdeveloped for their being crammed into a sea of historical and medical pamphlet bullet points. Then there's that weird prologue where the Modine character witnesses the effects of the Ebola virus in Africa, but whose scene is apropos of really nothing that has to do with the actual subject matter at hand. I could complain, too, about things like the mawkish music and the heavy-handed explanations of gay lifestyle being telegraphed to the suburban audience. On the other hand, I could argue that the sheer emotional power of the epilogue erases any of the film's cinematic shortcomings. But the film as a work of cinema notwithstanding, as a Trojan horse of information breaching the gates of couch potato America, it's incredibly successful. Remarkable, actually. To be sure, a lot of us watching it on HBO when the film was initially released learned most of what we knew about the disease from this film. We became aware of AIDS at last. Upon viewing it this time around, 22 years later, when being diagnosed with HIV isn't the automatic death sentence it once was, I was most struck by the film's indictment of the governmental institutions who so obstinately tried to remain unaware of the threats posed by the disease long after they should have conceded its deadliness. God, we're so full of shit. For all our species' dick-swinging bravado, for all our back-patting and boasting about our superior human faculty of consciousness, it's amazing just how very unaware we are of the world spinning right in front of our eyes. I think, therefore I am. Those words are at the very foundation of Western understanding. 5 words. 5. And 2 of them are I. What of the rest of the world and everybody else in it? We may exist, but it's in a tiny universe comprised of a population of 1. We may have produced more pages of philosophy and religion about our wonderful self-awareness than there are visible stars in the sky, but most of us wouldn't be able to tell you what our neighbor does for a living. Hell, we don't even know when we're living in the midst of a historical epoch of terror. I didn't. In 1990, I was 16 and bursting with good old-fashioned American semen. My days were mostly spent following around my penis to whatever pretty girl it led me to, but I wasn't aware, capital A aware, that I was living in the midst of a state of serious sexual terror. Oh, I knew about HIV/AIDS. I knew in a health class phys ed kind of way that there was this thing out there somewhere. That's the finger points at many, including the Food and Drug Administration and, by extension, Ronald Reagan and his conservative administration. These governmental officials, because of fiscal considerations or homophobia, take your pick, willfully ignored the HIV/AIDS threat so adamantly that they were implicitly willing to continue to distribute HIV-infected blood supplies to patients who were in need of it. In other words, they were willing to be murderers. This is straight from Shilts' book. The discovery of AIDS in the nation's blood supply and subsequent lack of response by the blood banking leadership occurred as early as 1982. Yet not until 1985, when AIDS antibody testing was approved by the Food and Drug Administration, did blood bank industry leaders acknowledge that HIV could be transmitted through blood transfusions. If this isn't cause to stand on a lawn, like Shilts and these filmmakers did with this film, and shout at the people living inside with warnings that they were drinking piss, I don't know what is. The CDC first began yelling on the lawn of the White House in 1982. Ronald Reagan didn't even mention the word AIDS until 1987. Governmental bureaucracies run by big businesses will almost without fail attempt to maintain the status quo in lieu of protecting the community they're tasked to serve. Let me say that again in case anyone missed it. Just about every kill me if I wasn't careful where I pointed my Siemens squirt gun, but I didn't know about it. I had never come to terms with it. Not really. Never looked it in the eye. The point is this, and I know it's a fine one, but it's true all the same. You can know about something without being aware of it. In fact, you could know something is right there in front of you and be completely oblivious to it. We know about the air, but how many times a year do you think we think about it? How often are we aware of it? Almost never. And air is basically what keeps us alive. Let's say this hypothetically, for instance. Every time you turn on the faucet to get a drink of water, you know that at least part of what's coming out is urine. Your neighbor's urine, let's say. There's some weird cosmic plumbing issue in this hypothetical instance that our greatest plumbers could never resolve, and it's like this pretty much for everyone. Everyone's water on the block, in the town, in the country, is laced with a little bit of piss. If it's always been that way, even though you know about it, at some point you're going to become unaware of it, if indeed you were ever really aware of it to begin with. And then along comes some dude from some distant land banging on your front door screaming, "Hey buddy, you got any idea that you're drinking common piss out of that faucet of yours?" Well, you'd be stunned and embarrassed, and you'd be suddenly faced with the question of how to deal with this asshole who just fucked everything up for you. For all intents and purposes, that's pretty much what the 1993 film and the band played on is. It's someone on America's front lawn shouting, "Hey, look at how fucked up this thing is that's been happening in our country." It's almost literally this, in fact, for it was originally a made-for-cable picture, and it entered our suburban living rooms almost against our will. Directed by Roger Spottiswoode and based on the eye-opening book by then San Francisco Chronicle journalist Randy Shilts, the film chronicles the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, covering its initial infiltration of the gay community and its rapid spreading, the first days of its detection, the dark alley attempts by the scientific community to understand it, their quibbling over credit for the progress being made, the enraging bureaucratic stupidity of the government institutions tasked to deal with it, and, of course, the terror-inducing escalation of the disease's steadily climbing death toll. The film stars Matthew Modine and Alan Alda and features cameos by just about every other actor working in Hollywood at the time, straight on down to cameo appearances by Steve Martin and Phil Collins, of all people. By all accounts, most of them worked on scale in the spirit of solidarity and civil duty. It's a film not without its flaws. Firstly, it falls into that amorphous category of edutainment, and finding the line between the educational and the entertaining is never an easy task. At the risk of overgeneralizing here, I'd say that the best films of the genre are the ones that take the most liberties with the material